computer. Thanks for joining us, Lindsay.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Can you see, for those of you in YouTube land, here's your incentive. Watch this on YouTube. Lindsay is in Costa Rica with some beautiful palm trees in the background. It looks so nice there.
Thank you. Thank you. I know I was just, as you know, pivoting from my bed to the palm trees in my corner office. I have a different kind of corner office, but
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing corner office. Quite the deal.
thank you. I love the nature. It makes me feel calm every day.
Ooh, absolutely. I feel calmer just watching your half of the screen as we record this. So Lindsay and I met at A-Fest back in May in Sardinia, Italy, but we didn't get to know each other much then, but I did start following her on social media, which is actually kind of the story of many people that I've kind of met at A-Fest and then got to know through social media. But one day she had an Instagram story and it was called "Before You Quit, Try This." And the message that she had on that I will let her expand upon was start again. Before you quit, start again. And obviously I was super intrigued. And so I watched the video and I agreed with everything in it. And I wrote to her and I was like, Lindsay, will you please come and share this with the Quit Happens audience? And she was super lovely enough to come and share. And she has all kinds of insights about quitting, especially for high performers. That's who she tends to work with. So Lindsay, if you could tell us a little bit about that video you had put on Instagram and the message you had.
Yes. So how it started is I do a lot of work with high performers and people who are achieving at a high level. And a lot of times people will come to me at a time of a crossroads. And so I get a ton of people over the years, hundreds of people over the years saying, that's it, I'm done, I'm quitting my job, or I'm done with this relationship. For me, it tends to be more career related that brings people in, but it could be relationship, it could be insert anything. I'm sick of this town. And what I found through my work, and because my own story involved quitting a management consulting career and going out and following my bliss and creating this life from scratch, I was at first really attached to getting everybody out and helping everybody quit. That literally was my mandate when I started this work that I'm doing, was to help everybody quit corporate and follow their souls. And what I found was, by working with so many people, hundreds of people over the years, that my arrogance in assuming that that's what would work for everyone else because it worked for me was very much humbled. And I realized that a whole lot of other things can and should happen before necessarily doing kind of a cold turkey, that's it, I'm out. And so it really came from me observing the work that I've done with so many people over the years, where they come to me and I'm legit, I'm buying into, I'm like, yeah, let's have you quit. But through the work we do together, I've noticed that what has been even more exciting is the way that they've been able to transform and grow internally. But even more exciting to me is how they've then stayed as a catalyst within whatever organization or situation they were already in, and have then become a massive change agent for what was potentially previously a quote unquote toxic environment, or they just don't get it, or whatever those stories are that we have in following our purpose. And so I have many examples of people who were able to transition their own lives towards one that 100% aligns with what they desired, but B, also then were able to take that leadership back into their previously existing context and then become profound agents for change.
Ooh, that is powerful because it covers so much of the different pillars of strategic quitting. Because I'm assuming that in order to have that, you said that like internal growth, they may have had to quit some mindsets along the way or some limiting beliefs.
100%. Yes. So that's obviously the massive, the majority of the work that we do is I'll have them say, great, you want to quit? That's amazing. What do you hate about where you are? And we just go right into it. And there's obviously an element of processing in that, of clearing, of acknowledging how we feel, of acceptance. But also through that, we can start to discern what are the specific pieces of the situation that aren't resonating. And oftentimes it is a mindset or an attitude, or I just can't do this here, I just can't be that here, or they just won't such and such here. And so what I would do then is challenge them one by one in the kindest but toughest love kind of way, to go in and, oh, really? Like, let's test that hypothesis. Why don't you be the change? And that's always my challenge, because I think when a lot of people come from a place of quitting, there's a lot of energy of blame. it's the job's fault, it's my boss's fault, it's the this fault, it's the that. And that may be true, but my definition of leadership is really about taking full responsibility for our own roles in creating our own realities. And we could talk about that on many levels, literally from like conversations we have or ways that we show up or how we perform, right on down to energetically. You know, if we believe everyone's out to get us, then that's what we're going to attract into our lives, for example.
Absolutely. And when you're going through with these clients and they've walked in, assuming they're going to have to quit everything, doesn't that seem fairly daunting to them? And contrarily, like once you've pointed out, you might not have to quit anything except for these beliefs. Is it a relief on some level to them?
Mm-hmm. I think it is. And I think that's the magic of the conversation. Is I think there's also in our society, maybe everybody kind of wants a quick fix. You know, I want to take a pill. I want to do this. Not, you know, it's just like, I want to just everything to be resolved right now. But if we just quit the job, it seems like a quick fix at first. But like I said, it's just going to delay the process of introspection, of growth, of whatever it may be. And also sometimes it's very nearsighted. So it's not strategic, as you said. It's very reactive. And when we really get down to, okay, what does that look like? Because I've also, as we all have, seen people on the other side of reactive moves who then all of a sudden are struggling financially or struggling. And not to say people should operate on their fears by any stretch, but there's a middle ground between throwing out the baby with the bathwater and starting to figure out how much of it. And also timing is everything. That's the other thing I say to people, because when we start to break it down, and if I give them, sometimes people just need permission to have the thought that they want to leave, and then they can start to breathe back from the edge of that feeling. But there are things like timing, for example, is an issue. Maybe they want to quit, but a year from now is a better time, or 6 months from now after, I don't know, bonuses come out, or they're about to go on mat leave, or they want to have, and it's, there's like a million different factors that when we break it down, while it might seem like a quick fix, are actually potentially detrimental in the long run. And I think all things considered, there's a lot less risk inherent in just throwing things away. Because if you can adapt the situation you're already in, then, like I said, it's like leaving one bad boyfriend thinking the next bad boyfriend's going to be better. It's like,
Absolutely.
It's not the boyfriend, it's you. You keep choosing the same thing, or you keep acting in the same way. It's like that kind of reflection, you know. Yeah, there's some I don't know the word, like maturity or substance there, and sticking in the yuckiness to clear our own role in it, or our own responsibility for the healing.
Absolutely. And so what you were saying with your start again was, in the same role before you quit, start doing your job but with new eyes, or with a new attitude, or putting in 100% if you'd only been putting in 50. Is that what you meant by the start again?
Yes. One of my favorite examples of this is so good, because it was like hands down, undeniably one of the most toxic corporate cultures that you could ever imagine. And I'm listening to these stories, and I ended up working with there was a group of elite SVP leaders, and I ended up working with 3 out of 5 of them, because they spread the word. So I got to triangulate in each of their sessions, like just how bad it was.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, it was really bad. It was as like bullying, alpha, the whole, every kind of worst case example of a corporate culture that you could imagine. And I had these 3 clients who were all super high performers, but didn't feel like they were operating out of fear a lot of the time, and rightly so, because they were in, by all accounts, a quite abusive culture. And so there were a couple of characters who were particularly aggressive or bullying. And so one example was, it was a very competitive, divisive culture. So one of the things that one of the women that I was working with said is that she desired to have a more collaborative work environment, and thought that just was not possible in that environment. And by all accounts, she was right. The evidence showed she was right. However, we did this work together. And one of the exercises I love to do is about challenging assumptions. So sitting across from somebody and just saying to them, I assume you don't like me. I assume X, Y, and Z. You can just go on, and it's very vulnerable and it's very real. And she invited this person who was her most combative antagonistic person in her group out for lunch. And she said, I just want to clear the air. My intention here is to bring us closer together to try to heal this relationship. And she had this very raw, very real conversation with him and ended up turning him into her number one ally through this vulnerability. She went in with fresh eyes. She went in with an open mind. She went in with different communication tools. She went in with humility. She went in with listening. She went in with all these different new eyes. She started again, and it ended up transitioning to being, he became her number one ally. They started collaborating across their groups. Both of their performances skyrocketed on their numbers and their KPIs. And it was just incredible. And they, through the work with these other clients I had, they shifted the entire culture of their senior leadership team, which then you could see could distill through the whole organization.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So that's an example of how starting again, even in the most toxic, horrific thing ever, can completely change your reality.
That's a great example and incredible job. That's well done for her and whatever coaching led her to get there, Lindsay. That's very impressive because that takes a lot of courage on her part to even make that move.
Totally. And that's why I'll take no credit. I was going to say thank you. And it was totally her. That's the one thing I love about coaching is I'm just the mirror for the wisdom that lies already within the clients. And she had the tenacity and the guts to do that. And to this day, like, obviously I'm still telling the story. It was like 12 years ago, but it was so inspiring to me to see that level of again, of that's true leadership to me.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. A few more things that I pulled out of what you were saying before. You were talking about just the thought of being able to quit starts a transformation. And I believe that has so much to do with freedom because so many people feel stuck or trapped. And the thought of quitting sometimes doesn't even cross their mind as much as they're like loathing whatever they're doing. It just seems like I got to keep doing this. There's, no end in sight. Sometimes,
Yes.
like you said, just processing that potential, like, no, at the end of the day, you don't have to be doing this. There is
Yes.
something else you can be doing, right? Because then that opens possibilities.
Yes. And that's why I love, like, the first thing I'll say is like, great, then you should quit. So it's not an either or. I'm not like, no, you can't quit. You must start again. It's all of it. We explore all of it, because I think a lot of people's feelings of being trapped, feelings of being a victim, feelings of whatever it is, claustrophobia or stunted growth, is because they give their power away. They're like, well, I can't quit because, and they'll give you 1,000 different reasons. And I will challenge them on that. I'm like, actually, you can. You're making every choice every single day to show up at that job or show up in that career or show up in that relationship or whatever it is. And that's, again, a little bit of the tough love of calling them on the assumptions, because we tend, I think, often, and depending, especially, I will say this, different kind of buckets of high performers, but a certain bucket of high performers who would maybe be very academically inclined or very taught through those types of indoctrination to be people pleasers or to aspire to greater and greater levels of achievement or prestige or title. They get myopic and they start to think this is the only way. I must be SVP by the time I'm 30, or I am a failure, or I must make partner at the law firm before I'm such and such, or I'm nothing in the world. So that's why I do, and I have beautiful examples of and we all do, of people who are among the happiest, most what I would call successful people on the planet, who are completely outside of any of those types of North American traditional silos. So yeah, the freedom to start blowing out those assumptions, beliefs, societally induced, familially induced, internally induced rules that we place on ourselves. I'm like, let's just shatter it all and play with it all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that. And you also mentioned the timing. And
Yes.
I think it's a great combination of things that happens here, because with strategic quitting, you help someone identify, like you were saying, the proper time, because maybe there is a bonus coming up, or maybe your group is doing something where they are going to be a lot happier with you if you see that project through to the end.
Yes.
He's going to leave a
Yes.
lot better taste in their mouth if you leave after that's completed. But say they're having symptoms of anxiety or stress or whatever is leading them to want to quit that job, the techniques you're talking about, these start again techniques, these reevaluation, and just the thought of the freedom, that has to help them get through that period.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's again where okay, so one of the techniques I learned years and years ago is this idea that when we point the finger, there are three fingers pointing back at us. So that's really leads me into this Gandhi kind of be the change you wish to see in the world approach to leadership and to life that I challenge every one of my clients and myself to live to. So for example, that example I just gave you, or I know some people will say, oh, this culture is so dry, it's so boring, I can't have any fun. That's just another example. So, or it's stressful. So I would say to them, okay, how can you show up as the embodiment of the culture that you desire? So that could look like a meditation before work if they're getting anxiety and stressed out. It could look, I often give the homework of finding the funny. Like, what if you just went through your day finding the funny things in your work environment, and like Office Space style, the absurdity or the thing, and all of a sudden this like horrifically, oppressive work environment becomes like food for your giggles all day long, and all of a sudden your whole experience of work starts shifting. Or what if you decide to, I know so many people show up at work with a certain persona, like I'm the serious smart person at work, but I'm actually super fun and silly at home. But God forbid those two worlds ever cross. So I will invite them to bring the silly, bring the fun, anything to try to just shake things up and embody again what they desire more of, that they've blamed their work environment or their boss or their, again, I'm using work as an example. It could be their partner, their relationships, whatever they're quitting or wanting to quit. Just be the change. If you desire more joy or more fun or more freedom, this is the other thing, freedom. Let's use that example. Oh, I can't do anything. I'm trapped to my desk, is like, who says? And I had this experience in my own life where I decided, I was in management consulting, and I had this calling to go traveling at a early stage where it was, the rules would say that I was crazy to do it because I hadn't followed all the steps. And, I thought I was basically sabotaging myself for the rest of my life. And I thought it was an all or nothing situation. I would either have to play the game or be blacklisted for the rest of my life from the game. And so I went in to quit and ended up being met with open arms by the managing director, who said, oh my gosh, we think travel is an incredible experience. We value what you're up to. We support you. Take a leave of absence. Don't quit. We will welcome you back. And so I had assumptions about what freedom looked like in my situation. And I've done this again with hundreds of people over the years. It could look like asking for Fridays off at a cut rate. It could look like working flexible, some days from home, some days from, and this, I'm going back now because this has become kind of mainstream, but when I started, it was not done. And so a lot of the work I've done with people is to really challenge them to ask for what they want, because people remove themselves from the equation without even asking. And that's just a couple or types of work you want to do. So I had two amazing examples of people. This is so fun. They're so great. One at Procter & Gamble and one at Accenture, who both came to me like, I'm done, I'm out. I can't do this work anymore. My soul's telling me I need to go do this other work, which in their both cases was around coaching, and they wanted to do people development. So we went through all these processes that we're talking about, and both of them separately, they didn't know each other, worked with them at different times, ended up going back to their leaders and saying, this is what I desire. This is my passion. My soul's calling. Both of them ended up creating the first coaching role at Accenture and at Procter & Gamble at the time, about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, changed the whole culture of those companies.
Ooh.
Their bosses said, oh my God, this is awesome. We've never heard of coaching, but it sounds amazing. Can you take this on? Can you lead it up? Can you start doing workshops in-house? And both of them are still in those organizations 13 years later. And I can only imagine the ripple effect of those two ginormous and massively influential organizations now, with those beautiful pillars of this type of work happening right within their walls.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. So many things in there. First off,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to quit everything. That's a huge part. Like this is kind of the theme you've been talking about. Like when people come, like, okay, my job is not working for me. Which part of your job isn't working for you?
Yes.
Because is it the commute? like you said, in this day and age, that's really easy to fix. It is significantly
Mhm.
easier to get a little bit of courage up, go ask your boss to work from home a few days a week than it is to find an entire another job
Totally.
if that's the only thing that's bothering you, like you said.
Yes.
And that led into the second thing, that you'll never know if you don't ask. And
Yes.
they like, there are a few models in my life. That's number one. And number two is, it never hurts to ask. And colon or semicolon, parentheses, if it does hurt to ask, you're in the wrong position, right?
Mhm.
Because if you go to your higher up and there's some repercussion for you asking for something that's necessary for your self-care, for
Mhm.
your lifestyle as it is currently, and maybe like you said, that's Fridays off at a reduced pay or something. If just asking that question has such dire repercussions, you are in probably a toxic environment that you should not be.
Yes. 100%, 100%. And that's a fit issue. And that's when you're just like, this is, and when you know, that's one of my mantras too. When you know, if you're like, no, it's just time for me to go, then I wouldn't even hesitate for a second. I would say trust that intuition. But I think a lot of times people are not necessarily in their knowing, they're in their reaction. So that what you just said is exactly right. When it's harming you, when your health is significantly failing, then you're definitely in the red zone, and either major changes need to happen, or that, if it's, as you said, if it's not even possible to have the conversation, then that's your answer
Yeah,
right
because
there.
yeah, you're right that things that have seemed impossible, people have asked for and gotten. Like Amit, who we both know, he was on the podcast about 10 episodes ago, and as a facial plastic surgeon, went to his boss and asked for like a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off schedule, which I have
Mhm.
never heard of in medicine, especially not something as intense as surgery. And for a period of time, he was allowed that. And
Yes.
he was at that kind of breaking point, like I need to be doing these other things. It's not even for him that so much that he didn't have a passion for medicine, but there were these other callings there was
Yes.
this friction between what he felt he should be doing with his time and just not having enough time to do it. And he asked the
Yes.
question, and you just have to
Yes.
ask those questions, because if you are a valued employee, which you should be if you're in a place that you are
Yeah.
working,
Yeah.
they should want to work with you in whatever way is beneficial to both parties.
Totally. And on both sides, nobody wants somebody sticking around who's miserable, and nobody wants to be sitting long term in a situation where you're miserable. So, yeah, I think that absolutely. And the other thing I was going to mention too is I've seen, and you just made me think of it, is even keep asking, is what I wanted to say. So, let's say you ask one person and you get denied. Don't be afraid to uh, keep poking your head around, talking to somebody in another department, talking to somebody higher up than that person, if we're talking about a hierarchical situation, because a lot of times there could be just simply personality conflicts, or somebody, like, I'm going to be super overly simplified in this, but somebody's just being a jerk, like,
Yeah.
and you go and you get support from other people who maybe your stakeholders or your champions, who may not have a direct stake in keeping you where you are, who would be more open-minded and more supportive in helping you. That's actually another whole conversation, but even just transferring departments within organizations, etc. So keep asking for what you want. Don't just ask once, and if it's a no, you're like, oh well, that's it. I would just keep going for it, and yeah, until you get a flat out across the board, this is not happening, and then you'll know.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
one of the things that you mentioned with that story where your two clients became coaches, essentially creating positions that did not exist. In
Hmm.
this economy, it has never been easier to do that. Like,
Hmm.
there's those types of roles, creating new roles within corporations, but there's also, at the end of the day, like I always say, if your thing is, I am a palm tree sculptor, you make your YouTube channel about palm tree sculpting, and there is a way to monetize that. Like, not everything is easy, and not everything is maybe going to be the six-figure job that I'm assuming coaching at Accenture is, but
Yeah.
there are so many options, and it takes a little bit of creativity to go
Yes.
from, I need to quit everything, I'm totally miserable, to let me
Hmm.
reinvent, let me look at what
Hmm.
parts I'm miserable at and what I want to do, and see if I can.
Yes, I love that. And that's actually one of the key strategies. I do it from an internal transformational perspective, that we should try to do the inner work before changing the outer circumstances. But I also do it a little bit from a practical perspective, which is I always say, because I've been an entrepreneur since that moment in time, and I can tell you there are a lot of nice things about working in an organization, like paid for trainings and mat leaves. And in Canada, we get great mat leaves. I didn't get any of them being an entrepreneur. So
I think that's maternity leave, right? Because we don't know what mat leave is.
Maternity leaves,
Okay.
yes. In the US, you're like, what? What's that?
What's that?
We get a year off in Canada, paid for.
Gosh.
So I have these clients that are like, yeah, I'm thinking of having a baby in like 2 months, but I think I'm going to quit my job before. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like, no, dude, sit it out. And I'm like, that's an exaggerated. I would probably still listen to them, but like, hey, let's just think this through. I know you really hate your job right now, but like, or on the other side of it, to be strategic. And I've had this experience because I've seen it in so many industries where all these hotshot superstars get recruited from different elite programs, but as soon as the economy turns, they're going to get fired and canned at the drop of a dime if it's not in the business's best interest. So I think everybody should be crystal clear that it is a transaction when you're working in any organization, and that you are not their best friend and their child, and you will be let go at any moment in time, and don't be fooled about that. So I've seen a lot of people with this blind loyalty, which is beautiful. However, they've been with an organization for 20 years, many of them sacrificing their personal lives, et cetera, their health, literally only to be fired at the next downsizing. And this is a classic story. This is like, it happens over and over and over again. So my challenge to everyone is to also be aware that you have the opportunity, and this is going to sound callous, but it's just truth, which is like, why not get your company to pay for a coach training? Or why not get your company to help support you for all the years of work that you've given to them on your next journey, and they'll benefit from it. So, instead of quitting cold turkey and going out and footing your own bills to go for all these trainings, I'm always saying to people, what can you leverage? You have internal training programs. You may have executive MBAs, for example. There's like all kinds of different programs that exist in a lot of organizations that people can leverage before they make the jump. And then they can even start in a more gradual way, a gentler way, for example, starting on the evenings or weekends, or starting to work within their organizations, practicing their craft, whatever their craft may be that they're desiring to transition towards. And that's again where for me, it's being strategic about it and not getting rose-colored glasses either about what it looks like to go cold turkey. Because people get this romantic idea, and I can tell you both from a tech startup perspective and more of an organic growth, which is my business, it's not always easy either to be out on your own. So I'm not trying to say that to freak people out, but I am saying it to like, be careful what you wish for, do what you can to get what you can in your current situation. And then with your eyes wide open and a nice foundation laid, then be willing to make the leap and figure it out on the way down, because it's also massively fulfilling and exciting and fun.
Yes. So much, yes, because I did the startup thing at some point, but I did not quit the medical job that I had. But I was in that place where I, like you said, romanticized the startup lifestyle. Oh, I can work from wherever and whenever. And as I've probably said 400 times on this podcast before, but I now realize like that's only great if you are working, and even great is maybe an exaggeration, but that's only really even delightful on any level if you're working for yourself. Because if you're working for somebody else and they're dictating, then you still have to work on their time and where they want, and they may be responsible for whether or not you ever do get paid. And so like this romanticized startup life, like that sounded like a dream, ended up being kind of a nightmare, and I quit after a year. But I did not up and quit the job that, I didn't reactively quit the medical job so that I could still survive in the interim.
Yes. And that's where you have to go. And this is a really big piece of the strategy work that I do with people, which is to go to the worst case scenario. So what if everything fails? What if you hate it? What if you blah, 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 everything that you just described? Do you have enough money as a safety net that if you make no money, as most startups don't, for the first 2 years or whatever, are you okay with that? Do you belong to every elite club in the city that you owe dues on? Like, be real about this. What is your status? Do you have 3 kids in private school? Like, I don't know. What are your priorities? What do you value? What are your currencies at this point in your life? So those are the conversations that we would definitely have. And and just being like, I say, plan for the worst and hope for the best. So have a budget, have a safety net, don't be reactive about it, be smart about it. And of course, have optimism and think that everything's going to be amazing and beautiful, because probably it is. But but it'll be even more beautiful and amazing if you're not coming from a place of fear and scarcity. If you're coming from a place of like, I got this. So I often will say to people to do just what you did, because when you go to pitch a new client, for example, but you're like, I got my bills paid with this other job I'm still doing, or at least my minimum, what I need done. So I'm not like desperate girl every time I go speak with a client, like, please hire me because I can't pay for my like rent if you don't hire me. People feel that and they're like, whoa, that's too much.
Yes.
So it can even be a strategic advantage to keep certain base needs met as you're expanding into a new environment or a new career path as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's a book that I'm reading called Quitter. I think it's called Quitter. It's next to me. But it says like the best way to make sure that your next job is some job you love is to not quit your current job, because then you aren't in that like desperation stank place where you're like, please, I will take whatever comes my way. You can be a lot pickier about what, because you just said in the boyfriend realm, you don't want to go from one bad relationship to another bad relationship just thinking like, oh, I'm just going to quit this one. Now I'm lonely. I'm going to go to this other one. Like, you've got to do the work.
Yes. And there's another great saying in that I've had a lot of experience with the kind of tech startup space. And when they're building the startups, the saying is that your company's never for sale. And so you don't want to look like you're trying to sell yourself. And so having that internal sense of power, empowerment of like, I don't actually need, I'm good. I got me. It's much more attractive to people to come to you. So it's sort of the same idea, which is like I would be happy to serve you in this new way, but I'm also okay if you don't want to hire me. It's like, I'm not really for sale. I'm like, it's a totally different version of empowerment. And it's not game playing or manipulation. It's just a sense, again, of trusting yourself, of abundance, of having your core needs taken care of, which then has people come to you. They're drawn to you like a magnet because they sense that you're confident in what you have to offer, you're abundant, and people are then, therefore, the irony is that the less you need them, this is life. This is the irony of life. The less you need anything, the more everybody wants it from you, right?
Yes, that's so good. Something else you brought up a minute ago that I wanted to not forget was you were talking about the company loyalty, and somebody's with the company 20 years and then they suddenly get laid off, right?
Yeah.
It backs up to that. And I believe we were talking about this after we started recording, but you were talking about, the thought of like, oh, how hard it is for lawyers to leave some law firm because, oh, I'm on my way to making partner, or I've been in this such and such role for so long and I'm going to climb the ranks. You never know when that plug is going to be pulled. So all of this staying with something because you've already been with something, which is essentially like, feeds into that whole sunk cost fallacy, right? Like, oh, you're miserable and you spent this much time and money, but you should spend more time and money because you've already spent this. Like, none of that ever makes sense to me. But I think people need that kind of like stated out loud to them if that's ever the process that they're using. But, okay, so you're going to put more time and money into this thing with no guarantees. There are no guarantees. The law firm could go under,
Totally.
So what is all this time and money you're donating while you're dedicating to it while you're miserable? It's going to be for nothing. Like, look,
Totally.
I think both you and I would agree that one of the like goals of life, if there's such a thing, is to have as few quote unquote regrets or rethought things as possible. And if I were to have any regrets, that would definitely be one of them. Is like, man, I could have been doing something else for this 20 years I was giving to this company, and then they just dissolved, or then they fired me. What was that for? I should have been out pursuing my passions.
100%. I totally agree. And I love that you brought up sunk cost. That was literally on the tip of my tongue. I'm like, of course, you just said it. It's perfect. Yeah, the sunk cost fallacy. And the other thing that I really, in the law firm example, is perfect. I've worked so much with lawyers, elite lawyers, and like that whole dance of partnership is just, it's like psychological warfare. And it's so raw and real in that environment specifically that it's like up or out. You're either partner or you're out on the street. But in a way, I appreciate the transparency of that, because it's really that way in any organization, and people put their trust and their faith. And
so people put their trust and faith in
organizations. And my whole thing of life is, let's take off the rose-colored glasses and
rose-colored glasses.
Rose-colored glasses. My rose-colored glasses that I live in the jungle and sometimes the power goes out. Glasses off. Sometimes the power goes out in the jungle. Let me share that. If anybody's fantasizing about moving to Costa Rica to work in the jungle and all this stuff, the power goes out. You got to deal with stuff.
Is that what just happened?
Yeah, the power goes out here periodically. So my internet just went. So let me just use that as the perfect example to say that we can have a fantasy about how things are going to be. And the reality, it's for me, I'm all about now at this stage of life about truth telling to myself. Like, this is the way it actually is. And the question I ask people a lot about is what are their currencies? So whether it's safety, security, freedom, passion, for example, the whole going out on your own to be an entrepreneur or to do a startup sounds sexy, but a lot of times, and I would say maybe even more than 50% of the time, people realize that they actually love group interactions. They love working as a part of a team. So that's just one example of really getting deep into knowledge of self before we make the big leap into something new and get really clear about, or another one I see a lot of is people are more risk averse than they think they are. So when we get into, not having a steady paycheck, not having benefits, not having the prestige of a job title that looks great at, a cocktail party, all of a sudden, this sexy kind of other path just gets a little bit less sexy, and they start to appreciate what they have more. But again, let's go full circle. If you come back to where you start, but with fresh eyes, it's like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, right? Like, it's the same but totally different. So that's the opportunity, or you make it entirely different through the exercises and the activities that you start to try out. So
yes. Okay, now in case the power is going to go out again, I wanted to get this one last question in for you, because you have worked with these high performers in many different fields. Many of them probably leaving those fields, the ones who don't decide, okay, starting again is enough. They want to make a complete break. Mm-hmm. How do you help them through the loss of identity, quitting the identity of being a lawyer, a high-powered executive?
That's such a good question. That is a really good question. I think that part of it is really what I mentioned way earlier in this conversation, which is about processing and just allowing them to grieve the death of what was, or the death of the dream of what could have been. And so there's not really anything to do with that. That's where the being and the doing dance of growth and transformation happens, is like, just be with that. And yeah, that's over. That chapter's over. But I also remind people, this is the most, actually I'm getting goosebumps about this, because this is the most exciting thing that people don't realize. And I know you've had experience with transformation, and so have I, transitions. You don't leave yourself behind. You might leave that job title behind, but you don't leave your brain behind. You don't leave your charisma behind. You don't leave your skill set that you developed, your ability to connect with people, your network. You bring yourself. And so it's not, to me, it's less about closing one door and opening another, which is a great analogy and true in some ways. It's more about using everything we've done so far as a stepping stone or a foundation for the amazingness that's still to come. So just because you're not a lawyer doesn't mean you're not still super smart, super analytical, super gifted at reading people, able to generate business, able to, all these skills are transferable, and you take them with you. And not only that, you also have the credibility of a background that is impressive, and that people will instantly establish a certain level of trust in you because you've proven yourself in another realm, which, like I say this to people all the time, you're not starting out as if you're like 21 again in a new thing. You're starting from where you are, and you're just, maybe you might have to be a student or a bit more humble for a little while, but you're not going back to ground zero. So yes, let go of the identity, but honestly, that's a great exercise in and of itself anyway. So I would be all over that from a spiritual perspective. I'm like on that from the very beginning, never mind if they're quitting or not. If your whole life and identity is tied up into your job, then we got more to talk about than just the job. So
that's such a good point, because as Tim Ferriss says, diversify your identity. Like, many parts of it you can't control. Like, if somebody, say something something happened and you lost your law license, whether or not you were in control of what happened. I mean, it'd be hard to lose without your control, but you never know. Maybe you're accidentally in a firm and you didn't know they were doing shady things, and everybody goes down with the firm. Somebody takes away part of your identity. Let's hope you have other things there.
Yes.
And that's what you're talking about.
And that's, I'm going to just end on this idea of the whole thing is a journey. The whole thing is a journey of self-discovery. And ultimately, the journey is that it doesn't really even matter what we do for our work or who our partners are. It's just an opportunity to be more in tune with who we are, what our passions are, what our desires are, and to know that whether I'm working here or there, I'm not better than or worse than anybody or than myself 5 years ago. And that's really just a whole different conversation about ego and fear, and invitation to use every single transition as an opportunity to fall more in love with all of who we are, in our craziness, in our fears, in our insecurities, in our highlights, in our glory, and our victories. And to me, it's ultimately about just falling more in love with who we are so that we can be more in love with humanity and with the whole human experience. So it's a beautiful vessel to do that kind of work.
That was the most beautiful last thing to end on. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Oh, this has been a pure delight. Like, if you can't, those of you, again, watch the YouTubes, but I'm just like glowing with excitement for having this conversation.
So beautiful.
What you all should know is, like, we don't talk about this beforehand. This is what we're going to discuss. Literally, we're like, what was that Instagram post? Okay, that was, like, that's all the setup we do. And that's when you got two people as passionate about quitting as the two of us are, in the right way and with the right mechanisms and all of that personal growth that comes along with it, then these conversations are just a total delight.
Yes, thank you. And I want to thank you because I think the reason it's such a delight is that you're so in service and you're so coming from this place of pure love. And so thank you so much for creating the platform that you've created, for inviting me to be a part of it and to contribute to this beautiful, amazing work that you're doing in the world. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate that. You just gave me chills. We are going to link to every last piece of unicorn sparkle that you are everywhere in the show notes. So if you want to find Lindsay, just go and tell us where they are on social media in case these people never look at the show notes.
Lindsay Alive on Instagram and Lindsay Sukornyk on Facebook, and aliveandawake.com is my website.
Beautiful. Thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a delight. Thank you so much.
And for everyone else out there, until next time, happy quitting.